Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to be going over one of my all-time favorite curling variations. You can do this in the way that I have it set up here, but we're going to talk a lot about principles and how you can think about this, not just in the context I'm going to show, but many different contexts. So without further ado, let's just let it play. If I had to give a name to this exercise, it's, I don't know, a single arm dumbbell curl on a lat pull down machine pad. And many of you may not have noticed that already, but here's the weight stack. Here's the lat pull down seat. Here's the pad that people normally face in the opposite direction underneath, right? So people typically face this way and do their pull downs that way. But what we're going to do to set this up is face in the opposite direction. And there are a couple of very, very key points here that I want you all to consider. So the first and probably most important is specifically where you place the upper arm. So we'll continue looking at the motion in just a second and the particularities of the motion, but just notice the point of contact of this pad on the back of my arm. Notice that it is not on the belly of the tricep or somewhere close to the shoulder, right? So this pad is on the lower end. It's basically as close, if you picture this right here as my elbow joint, where this forearm bone is actually pivoting around. It's as close to the elbow as I can get while still being, number one, comfortable. And number two, not interfere with any of the motion of this bone backward, right? Because if I allow this to play, what many of you will see is this bone actually travels a little bit backward just due to how the bones in the elbow actually move. Okay, so that's thing number one is placement of this pad in the upper arm. You want it as low as it can be, number one, and as comfortable as it can be with a sort of comfort, again, that you can sustain throughout the set. Number one. Number two, what you'll notice about this variation in particular is that I'm actually leaning backward. And because I'm leaning backward, there's a little bit of an interesting thing going on here with where the resistance is actually heaviest. So just as a very brief sort of lesson in physics here, if we imagine that this green line is going to represent where the dumbbell is at this point, right? And we look at, okay, how far is that green line number one that I drew, which is, 90 degrees from the floor. Green line number two that I'm slowly drawing right now. How far is that line? Just note the distance of that line. In other words, it's, this far versus by the time I get to the top, look what happens to the line. So if I go to the tippy top right here, okay, we're going to do that same thing. We're going to drop a line down, say, okay, here's that line. And now all of a sudden, here's that distance. So if I had to take a guess, I can't overlap these two right now. My tech skills are not that savvy enough, right? Here is distance number one. And then by the time we get to the bottom, and I'll play this again, the distance nearly doubles. All right, so what does that mean and what does that imply? Well, by the time I get to the bottom right here, there is legitimately twice as much resistance on the elbow joint itself in this position as compared to the top. Another way of saying that is that at the bottom of this motion, it's going to be really, really heavy and challenging. And at the top, it's just going to get lighter and lighter and lighter. And this is something that the normal, typical standing curl doesn't do. Just picture like a regular dumbbell curl where you're standing. The dumbbell curl pretty much has no load, or effectively no load, on the biceps in the bottom position, right? You're just holding weights at your sides. You could pretty much, the only thing you could load in that position is really just your traps to do some kind of shrug, right? But in this variation, because there's a little bit of a leaning back, right, we have that load in the bottom position, and we can actually experience what we call a drop off in that resistance toward the top end of the range. Okay, so number one, we have this anchor on the back of the side of the arm. Number two, we have a little bit of a lean back, and I'm also actually holding my other shoulder, or my working side shoulder rather, with my other arm. That's not something you have to do, but I just like to do it for awareness of kind of keeping my shoulders still in the same position. And then number three, we're going to actually have to look from a different angle to observe, which is basically just the alignment of the elbow and specifically how the elbow is moving. So what you'll notice based on this position, and I've seen a lot of people do this and kind of screw this up, is the upper arm specifically, if you drew a line through the upper arm straight all the way down through the floor, it would intersect the floor at basically 90 degrees. A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll be shifted too far over this way, just sitting normally in the seat. And so their arm will kind of look like this. And so they end up having a forearm like this, right? And so they end up kind of doing a curl like this to raise and then this to lower. But that doesn't really make much sense, at least relative to the goal, which is to load this joint right here. Because if you think about the direction that gravity is operating in, right, it's just straight up to down, or at least hopefully it's straight up to down, which is where we want to move the weight, right? It wouldn't make sense for me to move this dumbbell in a side to side direction over here, unless I was trying to load something completely different. right? So as I let this play, what you'll see, and another kind of simpler way to say all of what I just said is just look at how the weight is moving straight up and down. It is not moving side to side. It's not moving inward to outward. And my shoulder is not having to struggle to deal with any of that side to side motion, right? So big point number one, appropriate anchor point of the pad. Big point number two, a slight lean back can help you load the bottom of the motion. Big point number three, make sure that that dumbbell is moving straight upward and downward. And an easy, sort of simple way that I like to accomplish this is just simply by side bending over. It's kind of hard to tell. I just side bend over a little bit, right? So dip the working side shoulder downward just a little bit so you can lean over to that side. Now, just some final things is some extra nuances just to kind of, icing on the cake here for you all. I filmed this at the end of this set. Watch what I do here at the end. So I'm going to get to the last rep here and kind of fail. I can't get up. I actually tip my body forward. Now look what happens. Now I can actually extend the set for what some people rather call a mechanical drop set. And the reason that you can do this and keep lifting is because of that same concept we talked about earlier, right? So if you picture the first position, I'll just go back so you can have a clear visual reference. Here's the first position. We're at the bottom. This distance right here, draw it in red this time. Look how long that distance is from the load. So keep that little red arrow in mind. I can't keep it on there, but just keep it in mind. Keep that red line in mind. And now at the bottom position, look at how teeny tiny that red line is, right? Because the load is over here. So you would draw it kind of up to down like this, right? So red line in the first case was basically, if I remember correctly, something like this. Red line in this case is basically something like this. So all I've done by just simply tipping my shoulder forward is I've completely changed the resistance of the exercise to now it's actually heavy right here at the top position. Okay. One more time. We'll, hopefully you're all starting to kind of get get a better understanding here of how to draw these lines, also known as moment arms, right? Look how heavy it is now at this position, which by the way, was not super fatigued before, right? Because before when I ended up at this elbow angle, here was where I was, right? In this position, as we went over, very small line, right? In other words, very little resistance at the top compared to the bottom. So I'm basically just dipping forward to decrease load in the bottom where I was just really fatiguing and where I can increase load at the top, i.e. this whole long distance. So I'll just let the rest of this play. Notice kind of what happens. It just sort of, patters out a little bit less range, a little bit less range, a little bit less range. And then by the time I finish the set, I literally cannot move out of the bottom. And so I love, love, love this curling variation because your elbow, it's so easy to keep in place. Your shoulder, so easy to keep in place. And you can make these minor adjustments forward and backward to literally alter the resistance of the exercise and thus the challenge of the exercise and what portion of the range you're stimulating more. I'm not going to make sort of grossly extrapolated claims about what I think you should do. It really just depends on your goal and what you're trying to do. So many different, discussions to be had there. But if you want to really understand this stuff deeply, sort of at this level of analysis, check out the link in the description below. I have a 30-day beginner biomechanics course, right? All these lines I'm drawing, all these technical terms that I'm sort of distilling into simple descriptions for you all, they all basically just come from a very basic understanding of physics applied to anatomy and lifting that you all can learn in literally 30 days or less, right? The course is basically designed so that at maximum it would take 30 days to go through all the material, one video for each day of the month. And so if you're interested in learning biomechanics, you need no experience to start taking the course. It's made specifically for beginners. So check out the link in the description. I hope this video was helpful. I hope you can implement this curl variation with success. And let me know if you like it, if you try it in the comments below. And I'll see you all in the next video.